Hello there, Sage Popham here, founder of the School of Evolutionary Herbalism and Natura Sophia Spagyrics, and welcome back to the Plant Path. And in this episode, I want to discuss what I like to call the Zodiacal study strategy. For those of you that have been following my work for a period of time, you might know that central to the evolutionary herbalism paradigm is the integration of traditional astrological medicine from European tradition with modern clinical herbal medicine as a powerful tool for holistic assessment, remedy classification, and understanding the connection of physiological qualities in people and plants to their psychological, emotional, and spiritual attributes. But one of the biggest complaints that I get from people that I start to talk about this with is time. They're like, great, Saja, I was already overwhelmed just trying to learn how to become a great herbalist. And now you're saying to practice this way, got to learn astrology too. That's like this massive system. And I'm busy with my day job and I got family and I got home and I'm got my garden and it's just too much. It's just too much. And I'm here to tell you that actually it's not. And there is a very I would say strategic and a structured approach that you can take to studying herbal medicine where you actually are learning astrology at the same time. You see, I think one of the things with the I don't have time challenge that a lot of us have is overwhelm and not using the time that you do have intelligently and wisely. And one of the cool things about the synergy between astrology and herbal medicine is that they're actually built on the same fundamental pattern, that the underlying blueprint, so to speak, for both of these systems are the same because they're built off of the fundamental pattern of nature, which no matter where you are at what time, is the same. And so when you study these fundamental principles and patterns, you are literally able to study both astrology and herbal medicine at the same time, which I would argue both enhance the learning of the other. So I actually think it's a faster way to learn. So what I'd like to cover for you here is what I see as a very useful approach, a model, a map, so to speak, for study that you can incorporate into the time that you do have available, or rather the time that you make to study herbal medicine, because let's face it, you have to make the time. It's not going to magically appear. What differentiates a good herbalist from a great herbalist is discipline and consistency with your study and experience. So what I want to lay out for you here is 1 year, okay? 1 year worth of study. And by the end of it, you will have a incredibly solid grasp and foundation in both astrological medicine and clinical herbal medicine. So let's first start off by talking about the zodiacal pattern. So what does that mean? Well, as I'm sure many of you know, fundamental to the study of astrology is the 12 signs of the Zodiac. Now, these 12 signs form a really cool pattern for how to approach your studies for not just astrology, but herbalism. And this is because when we dissect a zodiac sign, we see that it is comprised of three fundamental qualities, or what I like to think of as its architecture. So we see that each sign has one of the three modes associated with it, right? In astrology, we refer to that as cardinal, mutable, and fixed. It has one of four elements associated with it: earth, water, air, and fire. And it has one of the planets associated with it, and whether we're talking 7 inner planets, Sun, Moon, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, Mercury, as well as the 3 outer planets of Neptune, Pluto, and Uranus. So what we see is that each sign is associated with a particular element, a particular mode, and a particular planet, and we would say some signs have 2 planets associated with it, kind of its traditional rulership based on when we just knew about 7 planets, as well as its modern rulership with including the 3 outer planets. Now, what's really cool about this is that these 3 layers of energetics, okay, planets, elements, and modes, what they're called modes in astrology. In my approach, I refer to them on a grander scale as principles, 3 philosophical principles, which is something that a term that we would derive from the Western alchemical tradition. Their 3 principles are sulfur, mercury, and salt, which essentially are the same things as the 3 modes. But what we see is these 3 layers of energetics, that the architecture of a sign is really at the basis of how cultures, traditions of herbal medicine have built their fundamental approach to understanding herbs, whether we're talking Ayurvedic medicine, Chinese medicine, Galenic medicine, Unani Tib, even some of the North American traditions of physiomedicalism, I would argue have this architecture built into their system, even though they didn't, use esoteric terminology like 3 principles or talk about the elements. But when you look at it, it's like, oh, that's what they're talking about. So I want to talk about briefly these correspondences in traditions, because when we study herbal medicine cross-culturally, we see that there are a lot of similarities in the underlying structure of their system, and that is in fact very similar to the underlying structure of astrology. So for example, as I mentioned, Galenic medicine and Unani Tib, which is the Arabic system of herbal medicine, very much so derived from the Greek system. These are ultimately based upon the fundamental 4 elements. So they're based on the 4, this is the classic 4 humor system, where people are classified accordingly to their temperaments: phlegmatic, melancholic, sanguine, choleric, etc. You have your 4 humors of black bile and yellow bile and red bile, etc. 4 degrees, so herbs are classified as either being warming, cooling, moistening, drying, qualities based off of the 4 elements. Depending on whether you follow the Plato's philosophy or Aristotle's philosophy, according to Plato, the elements were first and the qualities emerged from that. Aristotle kind of reversed that. That tends to be the approach that the Galenic model is, but that's just philosophical differences. But those herbs also operate in 4 degrees of, first degree is very mild, 4th degree is very harsh. So we see really the basic framework for these systems of medicine are based off of the elements. Another great example of this would be Ayurveda. Well, many folks these days are pretty familiar with one of the fundamental frameworks for understanding Ayurveda, which is based on their triune pattern, or the 3 principles of Ayurveda, which are the 3 doshas of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. These qualities bear very great resemblance to the 3 modes of astrology of cardinal, mutable, and fixed, whereas the Pitta dosha, with its very kind of active, dynamic nature, is cardinal. Vata, with its changeability and its coercibility, its airiness, its ethereal nature, is mutable in nature. In fact, mutable is a term we might use to define the Vata characteristic. And Kapha, being very solid and stable and grounded and earthy in nature, is fixed. So these 3 doshas very closely correlate to the 3 modes. Ayurveda also has the 7 datava, or the tissues, which have close connections to the 7 planets. Indeed, the 3 doshas also blend together in patterns that lead to 7 primary patterns. So you have your pure Pitta, pure Vata, pure Kapha. Let's see if I can do this off the top of my head. Then you have a Kapha Pitta and a Kapha Vata, and then a Vata Pitta and then the tridosha, vata, pitta, kapha. So 7 primary constitutional patterns, which very much relate to our 7 planets. Chinese medicine, they've got their 12 meridians, are likened to the 12 signs of the zodiac. The 3 treasures, the triple burner, have connections to the 3 modes. Now, Chinese medicine also, of course, has its 5-element system, which is a little different, right? Anytime we're cross-comparing traditions, there will be variances and subtle distinctions. So the 5 elements of Chinese medicine are a bit different, I would say, than the 4 elements. And in esoteric traditions in the West, they have 5 elements, but a little bit different in that 4 elements are really seen as states of being or states of matter in a sense, whereas the 5 elements in Chinese medicine is more representing processes of transformation. So it's they look at it through a slightly different lens. There are certainly connections to them, but they're not always direct one-to-one correlations. There's lots more correspondences and relationships that one could make between our models of herbal medicine and these fundamental patterns in astrology. There's many, many more, but these are just some examples to show how there are relationships. And it's very interesting when you're studying astrological medicine that you study, say, the pattern of Mars, and you see, oh, that's very much so the choleric humor. That's very much seen as a pitta excess. That's very much a liver fire rising pattern in Chinese medicine. There's a lot of similarities and crossovers that you can make. And especially if you're coming from one system, if you already have a good grasp of Ayurveda or good grasp of Western herbalism or good grasp of TCM, you can enter into a study of astrological medicine and it already makes sense, right? Because again, all of these systems are based off of a direct observation of the fundamental patterns of nature. And whether you're in the far east or the far west or the far north or the far south, those patterns are the same because we're all on one earth. There's one earth, there's one water, there's one fire, there's one air, and we all share that in similarity. But we're going to look up at the stars, and the stars are going to look a little different in India than the way they look in North America. So their perspective is slightly different and nuanced, but they are looking ultimately at the same thing. So let's look at we're looking at the correspondences in tradition. Now let's take a look at the correspondences in people and plants, because this fundamental pattern of the zodiac, the modes, the elements, and the planets govern correlations within people as well as within plants. So when we're looking at people, we can see that each modal quality, elemental, and planetary quality bears relationship to specific constitutional patterns. They govern specific organ systems and tissues of the body. They correlate to tissue state energetics, or what we also might think of as pathological patterns, like very specific disease states. They also, as many know from an astrological perspective, relate to character traits, psychological states, emotional qualities. It's the way a lot of people tend to think of astrology is, understanding your personality traits and characteristics. But a lot of people fail to realize that these patterns in astrology also relate to your body, to your physical body. So when you're looking at a natal chart, you're not just looking at the underlying structure of the psyche, you're looking at the underlying structure of the psyche as it is also imprinted in the body. And so you can glean very specific information about how that person is uniquely put together in terms of their constitution, their disease predispositions, what organs might be really strong or maybe excessively active, which organ systems might be weak, deficient, and underactive, what types of diseases they might be prone to developing over time. And therein lies a very powerful key to the synergy of astrological medicine and clinical herbalism, which is a preventative approach, which I think is the direction we should be moving into. Sure, we want to treat sick people and help them feel better and alleviate suffering and all of that, but I think it's a much better approach to promote health, vitality, rejuvenation, and prevention of disease, because, as they say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. It's much easier to prevent a disease from happening than it is to treat it, especially once something settles in on a very deep level. So these are some of the ways that we can use this zodiacal pattern to understand a person holistically. And I think that's a very important premise in modern day herbal medicine, that we want to understand a person holistically. We want to see the dotted line that connects their psychological, emotional state to their body, because there is a distinct connection between the two. In fact, they're not distinct. They're not separate. They're very much so connected. And especially when we incorporate an alchemical preparations of medicine in our therapeutics, we have the ability to use targeted remedies that address the whole pattern, not just the physical side with the regular tincture or tea, and not just maybe the subtle energetic or spiritual or psychospiritual side with, say, a vibrational based remedy like a flower essence, but we're able to have a single remedy that addresses the whole person. But in order to do that, we have to have a system that allows you to see and assess and evaluate that whole person, and to see the connections between those aspects and layers of the self. Now, the astrological pattern does a very similar thing to our understanding in plants. So through an understanding of the qualities and characteristics of, again, modes, elements, and planets, we can start to see really close relationships to our fundamental herbal properties, like the taste of the herbs. Fire, cardinal and sun Mars type herbs tend to be very hot, spicy, and pungent. That's just of the nature of those qualities. Saturn tends to be very astringent and drying and cold in nature, and we find that in the taste of the herb. So taste, we can look at the organ affinities of those herbs very similarly to how we see planets, elements, principles, or modes relate to parts of the body. Well, an herb that relates to all of those parts of the body can be seen as having a strong sympathetic relationship or correspondence to those astrological principles. Herbal actions very much so can be related to these principles. So things like demulcents are very lunar and water element in nature, right? They're working on the mucosal membranes and the fluids, and they're moistening to dryness and softening to hardness. All of our herbal actions can bear relationship to these principles. And of course, the specific indications. So there are some herbs that are very indicated for particular constellations of symptoms, pathological patterns in people. Those can also bear relationship to planets, elements, and modes. So as we see, this zodiacal pattern provides really a fundamental framework to study a person and a plant on a very foundational level that provides unique insights that you might not otherwise see or perceive in people and plants without that zodiacal framework. So, all that said, what is the study strategy, right? So how do you approach using the zodiac as a strategic study tool for herbal medicine? Well, as I'm sure everybody knows, in a 1-year period, the sun moves around the full zodiac, about 12 zodiacal signs, 12 months. We have every year experience those 12 signs of the zodiac as the sun progresses through them. So my approach to this is that you have a 1 month period of time where you have the opportunity to study a wide variety of aspects of herbal medicine, traditions, plants, people, and astrology based on the structure of that sign. So when we're in, say, the month of Aries, it's not just study the sign of Aries, it's study the architecture of Aries, study its element, study its planet, study its mode. Put those together to understand how to study the sign. Now, if you have correlations to those modes, elements, and planets, you can study all of the web of relationships to that architecture, which further reinforces your understanding of it. So the approach is to break it down, break the zodiac signs down into their composition. And from there, we use that framework to study the corresponding aspects of herbal traditions. So I'm going to break this down into some detail for you here. So that was all just kind of the setup. I'm going to get into a lot more detail here in terms of what this actual strategy would look like. So this is what you would be doing for each month to set up your approach to studies. So step one is you're going to learn people holistically. So the first aspect of this is you're going to study constitutional systems and energetics. So with your 3 modes, you're going to correlate those to the 3 doshas. With your 4 elements, you will study your 4 humors. And you would, with your planets and signs, you would be studying the physiognomy of those planets. And you know, one of the best resources for this is Judith Hill's book called The Astrological Body Types. This is an amazing book with great artwork that she actually did herself that really outlines the physical qualities and characteristics of the planets and the signs that those planets are associated with. So with our Aries example, you would be studying because it's a cardinal sign. So this is an opportunity to study the Pitta dosha because it is a fire element. You might take that opportunity to study the choleric humor and all of its associated characteristics. Your planet, you would be studying the physiognomy of Mars. And from that, you put all of that together to get a sense of the constitutional pattern that is Aries. From here, you could get into, so that's 1, constitutional systems. 2 would be organs, systems, and tissues. So each planet and sign has specific anatomical correlations. So this is a time to dig into some of your anatomy and physiology. I know this can be a little bit of an intimidating area sometimes for people. Because, you know, the books are really big and it feels like you're going back to school and it can be complex and very scientific. But I think if you want to be helping people with herbs, I think you should know how the body functions. I just think it's a good foundation to have. I think this is an important area to invest time into studying. So during this time, you would see, okay, what part of the body does, in this example of Aries, rule? Well, Aries tends to rule the head area. We could say the brain could be a part of that. The brain has some other rulerships, but really just the head in general is ruled by Aries. Now, that's not a very specific correlation, so we could drill down a little bit more and look at the composition of Aries. So we would say, oh, well, Mars rules Aries. Well, what parts of the body does Mars rule? Well, it rules the blood. It rules the male reproductive system. It governs the adrenal glands, or we might even say the HPA axis, or the body's stress response. It governs the immune system. So during the month of Aries, you could study those organs, those systems, those tissues. There's more with Aries, but that's kind of those are kind of the big ones. You could study the anatomy and physiology of those organ systems and tissues. You could do a similar thing for the ruling element and mode for that sign. Third aspect of learning people holistically would be pathological patterns. So typically each sign tends to have certain predispositions associated with it, certain diseases, symptomatic patterns, just health problems that they commonly deal with. So this would be an opportunity to study those pathological patterns. I would say this is, and there's two ways that I tend to think of this. On the one hand, there's like diseases that you could study from more of a, I guess, a modern medicine approach. But there's also overall energetic patterns and tendencies or predispositions. Okay, so one thing, like for example, with Aries, an Aries type is going to be generally prone to inflammatory diseases, right? So it would be a really great time to learn and study the inflammation process, right? What is happening with inflammation? From there, because it's also associated with immunity, we could say, well, we could study the underlying pathophysiology, say, of autoimmunity, which is a very prevalent problem in the modern world. So you could look at it from more, Aries, they tend to be inflammatory, they tend to have immunological issues, maybe blood disorders as well. So you could study those pathological patterns, but on a more tissue state side, they tend towards heat, right? They tend towards what we might refer to as a heat excitation tissue state or an irritation tissue state. So that would be a time to study those tissue states. And you can also take that and relate it to characteristics, again, of the dosha and the element. So what types of conditions is a pitta prone to? What types of conditions is a fire element prone to? And lastly, it would be the psycho-spiritual connections. So I think this is a great time to understand and incorporate what are some of the common psychological characteristics and traits of that sign, as well as its corresponding attributes or architecture. So what is the psychological function of Mars? Like, what does Mars represent in the psyche? And while you're studying those dynamics of the sign, the planet, the element, the principle, translate that into the physical attributes. Like, how is it that the ram of Aries, right, that just tends to charge into things head first and think about consequences later. Aries' fiery nature, their sometimes combative nature, their exertion of the will to live, right? They're exerting themselves of like, I have a will to live and a right to live. Like, how does that translate into what they experience in their body? This is when we start to understand the essence of the sign, because really the sign has an essential nature, right? There's an essential characteristic of that, of the sign, of this archetype that reflects on a spiritual level. What is it trying to teach us? How is it a step in an evolutionary process? What does it represent psychologically, emotionally, and what does it represent physically? There's one essence that's reflected on all of those levels. And so while, yes, we separate these levels to study them individually, the goal is to see what is the essence, and that's that dotted line that allows you to understand the sign holistically, but it also gives you the power to understand a person holistically as well. And this really, really enhances your practice as an herbalist, because it gets you beyond just looking at the disease, just looking at the symptom, and really looking at the whole person. Because as a holistic herbalist, that's our goal, is to treat the person with the disease, not just get myopic on the disease itself. So that's step one, okay, in your study strategy. Step two is going to be plants, right? Learning the plants holistically. So as you are working through your architecture of the sign, you're going to think of the tastes of the herbs, right? What tastes would be similar in nature to the architecture of that sign? So we talked about Aries, right, as fiery, it's cardinal or pitta, and Mars. Well, that's really hot, spicy, and pungent. So you should really base your understanding of a taste on the mode, the element, and the planet that relates to that sign, and think in terms of what is that, not just how does it taste, but what does that taste represent in the body. Just based on the taste of an herb, you can decipher what organs it'll touch, what types of remedial actions it might have, even what kind of chemistry the plant might have. You can learn a lot about an herb through its taste. And so I like to think in terms of what taste of herbs could relate to that sign. Herbal actions. So this is a really big one. The way I tend to think it through is, in part one, where you're kind of listing out and studying your organs, your systems, and your tissues that associate to this sign and its architecture, you would then consider, what herbal actions could I expect to relate to that, right? So we were talking about Mars and its relationship to, say, the blood and the immune system, the male reproductive system. Well, we could think herbal actions that could relate to that would be nutritive tonics that build the blood. We can think of antidiscratic alteratives that cleanse and purify the blood, often used for skin conditions, but they really work through cleansing the blood. We could think through herbs that operate on bleeding disorders. We could think about styptics. They stop bleeding. We could think about herbs that influence the immune system, right? Immune stimulants, immune amphoterics, immunoregulators. These types of herbs could bear some close correlation to that sign based on their actions. Now, one thing that where this can get a little complex is that there's two ways to look at this when it comes to herbs. The one way is the sympathetic approach, which would be, Aries and Mars has some associations with, the immune system and the blood. Well, we could think sympathetically of, herbs that are going to act on the immune system or on the blood, and having those types of actions. The other way of thinking of it, so that's similar. The action is similar in nature to the constellation of that sign. The other way of looking at it is what we would say is antipathetic or opposing, an opposite quality. So that would be almost like a quality in a plant that's totally opposite to the quality of that sign, but therefore would be remedial to it in a way. So an example of that could be, Aries is really obviously hot and fiery and inflamed. Well, if you had an herb that was very cooling in nature, it cools excess heat and inflammation and irritation, then that would be like an opposite quality to that sign. So that there's a couple different ways of thinking about it. I think initially it's best to think in terms of sympathy and just herbs that have a very similar quality to that architecture of that sign, because it just helps you to learn the fundamental principles, which is really the whole premise of this study strategy, right? Is that rather than just studying Aries and having it be this big esoteric concept, it's like you could take an herb that has a very similar quality and literally experience it, right? You can experience the quality of Aries and Mars and cardinal fire by taking a remedy and feeling that's effect in your body. And so herbal actions is an important area to study here. Of course, I think as Western herbalists, studying and knowing your herbal actions is very important. And the third piece is herbal energetics. So again, based on the overall qualities of the mode, the element, the planet, and the general qualities of the sign, what energetics might relate to it. And when I say energetics, I'm not referring to, esoteric properties or spiritual qualities. I'm really speaking about the ecological impact of the herb on the tissues of the body. And this is typically delineated by the temperature of the herb. Is it hot or cold? What is the moisture of the herb? Is it moistening or drying? And what is the tonal effect on the herb, right? Is it relaxing to tension, or is it contracting and tightening tension? So these are some of the ways that I tend to think of that. And so what would be the temperature, moisture, and tone of plants that would be related to that sign? So as you talked about with Aries, right? I think it would be pretty obvious that it would be a lot of really hot herbs, right? Hot, spicy, pungent herbs. Oftentimes heat, what does heat do? Heat tends to dry things out. So it would be herbs that are hot and dry would be most sympathetic to the quality of Aries. So that would be your strategy for studying studying herbalism, right? So again, so far in this framework, we've studied anatomy and physiology. We've studied pathophysiology. We've studied constitutional systems. We've studied tissue state energetics. In plants, we've studied the taste of the herbs. We've studied their actions in relationship to their organ affinities. We've studied their energetics. Okay, so you're studying multiple attributes of herbal medicine here, while at the same time, you're doing it in the context of that sign of the zodiac. So you're actually learning the zodiac sign at the same time. Very, very powerful. Now, the third step in this process would be Materia medica, right? Find some herbs. So when you've gone through this, you've got your lists of, tastes and your lists of actions and your list of organ affinities and your lists of energetics. And with that information, you should be able to find some plants that correspond to that sign of the zodiac, to its ruling planet, its element, its mode. And that is a really powerful approach to deciphering the correlations between a medicinal plant and the principles of astrology. A lot of people really rely on looking this stuff up in a book. Right, what herbs are ruled by Venus? And then they just go to a book and they look it up and they get this big list of Venus herbs. But a lot of time those books don't really explain why that herb is ruled by Venus. Is it just because it looks really pretty and has a nice perfumey smell? Is it because it influences the female reproductive system? Is it because it's relaxing to tension? Like, what is it about that herb that relates it to Venus? Well, no one really says so. There's not a lot of great reference material out there for that in an explanatory way. So I think figuring it out for yourself is a much better approach, because then you understand the why behind the plant-planet correspondence, for example. You also, in the process of figuring it out about an herb, you get to know the herb very well. You get to know the principles of herbal medicine behind how that herb functions. And at the same time, as I've said many times, you're learning your astrology. Now, this could be, again, herbs that are maybe similar in nature to that sign or sympathetic, or it could be herbs that are opposing, or what we might think of as being remedial to that sign. So, for example, a really good, simple example of an herb that could be very seen as Aries in nature is cayenne pepper, right? It's super hot, super spicy, pungent, drives the blood. It's a stimulant diaphoretic to treat fever, a very Mars, Aries kind of thing. The quality rises and expands like fire. It's a hot herb. It's a dry herb. It's alterative. It's lots of things that are Mars, Aries in nature, right? Very similar to that. Now, a plant that would be opposing to Aries, as I said, could be something that cools heat and maybe works via the opposing sign, which would be Libra. So Libra is like the balancing force to Aries. So a plant like yarrow could be an interesting example as a cooling, bitter herb that sedates heat and irritation. It cools inflammation. That could be seen as a very nice opposing, an antipathetic herb to some of the qualities of Aries, and therefore could be seen as a remedial to the qualities of Aries. So taking that time to maybe find a couple of herbs that would correlate to that sign and study those herbs in depth. So essentially what you've done in this process is put a specific container around your approach to studying herbal medicine. Hence, it's strategic. I think one of the big problems that people have when they're studying herbal medicine, wanting to learn about herbs, maybe wanting to incorporate astrology, is that the study is just very random. It's willy-nilly. It's like, oh, I'll read about this herb here, and maybe I'll learn about that herb over there, and I'll study this planet over here. And it's all just very scattered. When you put a framework around it, when you put an underlying strategic approach to it, you are going to, for one, accelerate your learning process incredibly, right? You're going to really learn all of this stuff much more quickly. You're going to learn not just your herbs, but you're going to learn the fundamentals of herbal medicine. And this is very important. We cannot learn herbs based just on what they're good for, what diseases they treat. We have to have a fundamental understanding of what the herb is doing to a person that takes it, that then leads to a particular therapeutic result in that person for that particular disease. Like, you have to understand the why behind this herb is good for that problem. And this process does that very, very well. You're learning your constitutional systems, you're learning your A&P, fundamental properties of plants, like all of it bundled up together, but in the context of the astrological signs. So this is my personal approach to doing this. This is how I've approached studying this yearly for a very, very long time. And it's fun. It's a really fun way to study because you get all of your books out and you open them all up to the similar chapter and you're cross-referencing them and you're hopefully taking notes. And this is a great opportunity to start kind of a journal or a certain folder on your computer or a note on your phone or whatever to organize this information, because what you're doing is you're building up this kind of library of understanding and knowledge and making connections between these systems that ultimately we're looking at the same thing. And sometimes when you look at the same thing through different perspectives, you just have a better, more well-rounded knowledge and understanding and approach to it. So that is the Zodiacal study strategy. And hopefully that helps give you a little bit of context and understanding for how to approach studying both herbalism and astrology at the same time. Hopefully that simplifies it for you, but hopefully it didn't make it feel more complicated for you and more overwhelming. And I know that can sometimes be the case, and I would love to just help you to learn this more quickly, to integrate it more effectively, and to be able to put it to use more quickly. So that is really ultimately what the Botanical Constellations course is all about that we have here at the School of Evolutionary Herbalism. And this course is now open for enrollment, but only for a short window of time. Pretty much everything I just laid out for you here is exactly what Botanical Constellations is all about. Every month, you will get a new lesson that goes in depth on all of these dynamics that I discussed here about how to approach studying herbalism and astrological medicine at the same time. So we will break it up accordingly to some of the general qualities and characteristics of the sign. We'll go in depth on people, on again, that psycho-spiritual level, the emotional level, the physical level, from the broad constitutional lens to the specific anatomical and physiological lens to the pathological lens, like scaling down in as much detail as possible so that you really understand that sign in people. Do the same thing in plants and really lay out the fundamental principles of herbalism and properties in plants that would point towards this particular sign of the zodiac, and illustrating it further with some examples of specific herbs that I personally feel are notable to discuss in the context of that sign. So this is a 12-month journey through the zodiac, going through this exact outline. So if all this feels overwhelming for you to try to assemble and put together yourself. I've kind of done the heavy lifting for you and put it all together for you in botanical constellations. So I would love to have you join me in that course. Click the link below to get more details on the course and sign up today. This is a short window of enrollment. We only open this up once a year at the beginning of the Zodiacal calendar. So it is starting now. The community is gathering in there, and we would love to have you join everyone, the great community of folks that we have gathering in botanical constellations. So click the link below, check out botanical constellations. This is one of our very affordable and approachable courses here at the School of Evolutionary Herbalism. So I hope you will choose to join us in there. Thanks so much for taking the time out of your busy life to tune into this episode of The Plant Path. And until the next one, take care and be well.